Welcome to Asian Horizon. Today in this video, I'm going to explain and examine the upcoming 7th round of the JCPOA negotiations. I'm also going to provide an assessment of the various scenarios and what is probably the most likely outcome within the current strategic context and the implications of this. So within a few weeks, supposedly we're going to see now the 7th round of the JCPOA negotiations in Vienna, and that remains to be seen if that takes place then or if we're going to see a further delay. May take a few months, maybe even into the beginning of next year, but probably there will be some type of statement or resumption of the negotiations within a few weeks. Now, what is going to happen? Well, first of all, the Iranian position is very clear. Iran wants a complete lifting of all sanctions, and that is verifiable. Iran wants to see investment from Europe and the US take place in that event, and therefore they want to be able to verify that all sanctions are completely lifted, and so that no European companies feel any concern about investing in Iran because of potential, US sanctions impacting them. Therefore, what is clear is that for Iran to accept any JCPOA agreement now going forward, they want a complete lifting of all sanctions. That is very clear. From the US side, it's not so clear that the Biden administration wants to lift all the sanctions. It has also been stated that the Biden administration may seek a larger agreement. Iran has rejected that option because Iran wants the previous JCPOA agreement, which was completed. It was signed by all parties. Iran wants that agreement to be implemented again. But again, the US position may be somewhat different. The Biden administration may be seeking a larger agreement to include also a range of other aspects in terms of both Iran's ballistic missile program, Iran's proxy engagement in various conflicts around the Middle East, and other issues. However, that is not likely to take place, although some analysts and journalists have said that there may be a larger agreement about to happen. Probably not likely, not in terms of the JCPOA agreement. However, there might be another larger agreement with Iran and the US in the future, but that is probably separate from the JCPOA agreement. It is probably also the US negotiation position an assumption that Iran's economy is probably less resilient than it is. In fact, Iran's economy now experiences growth. Iran has become, accustomed and used to having all these sanctions impacted on Iran. So Iran's internal economy and dynamics have not really kind of recalibrated and been able to actually assess the situation and get used to the situation, however challenging it has been for Iran. So Iran actually now is experiencing economic growth. In addition, as we did see earlier this year, Iran entered into a strategic agreement with China. Iran is also negotiating now a potential agreement with Russia. So, Iran is really advancing its strategic agreements and alignments towards the East. Question remains, will these strategic agreements be viable with the US sanctions imposed on Iran, when in fact Iran will need to go through the international banking system? I think that there might also be processes underway to find alternative payment structures between Iran, potentially China, Russia, and other countries. There could be digital payments where they can circumvent the international banking systems. There might be a range of options they're considering. There are also a range of types of barter agreements, exchange agreements. But I think that Iran is currently seeking ways to circumvent the international banking system and thereby not needing to, really be prevented by the US sanctions that have been impacting Iran heavily over recent years. So going forward, I think that, first of all, Iran doesn't really need the JCPOA agreement right now because Iran has become accustomed to a new situation, a new reality, and a new strategic environment also, which is changing in the Middle East. As the US really withdraws from the Middle East and focuses much more towards Asia, much towards China, we're also seeing now a recalibration strategically within the Middle East. The negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia are continuing. We're probably not going to see any major breakthrough between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the near future, but the fact that Iran and Saudi Arabia actually now continue their negotiations in various locations. It emerged from Baghdad in April, but recently they have not said where they're negotiating, but they are. And that is also kind of an interesting development, which is also impacted by the US withdrawal from the Middle East. Therefore, currently, within a few weeks, we may see JCPOA negotiations resume, but I don't think it is very likely that we will have a JCPOA agreement in the near future. When we come into 2022, we will probably know in 2022 whether or not there will be a JCPOA agreement. I'm not sure they're just going to continue with more and more rounds. There might be a few more rounds, but then in the end, they will probably need to make a decision. Iran is also fully aware that if the next congressional election in the US in 2022 really sways towards the Republican side, it'll be much more difficult for the Biden administration to reach a JCPOA agreement with Iran. In addition, Iran also knows that in the next presidential election in the US in 2024, if President Trump wins a second term, or if there is another Republican president who wins the election, then we're going to have a situation again where even if the Biden administration enters into a new JCPOA agreement with Iran, then the US may withdraw for a second time. So therefore, the situation is very tenuous. It is quite unpredictable, particularly for Iran in terms of what could happen, even if there is a JCPOA agreement. Therefore, the strategic environment for a viable long-term JCPOA agreement is not really there. It's not really present. Therefore, I think what is most likely going to happen is that probably now, with the current situation and the Iranian position and the US position being so far from each other, I don't necessarily think it's realistic to assume that we're going to have a JCPOA agreement within the near future. What can happen, and in a strategic environment, things can change. That is for sure. But right now, I don't see it being very realistic. Then, what is going to happen if we do not have a JCPOA agreement, and if that is then stated and becomes clear internationally? Well, Iran is going to continue, enriching uranium. Iran is also now advancing its ballistic missile program. There are clear indications that Iran wants to strengthen and even advance its ballistic missile program further. But also Iran is advancing a range of other military capabilities across a range of military areas. So Iran's military and defense capabilities is really advancing at a rapid pace. Iran probably does not have nuclear weapons right now, but Iran works very systematically within its research and development base. And I think it is probably likely that we can assume that Iran now has researched and prepared the various elements that will be needed to develop a nuclear capability if Iran decides to do so militarily. Remains to be seen when and if that will take place, but right now the situation is quite unpredictable in terms of the JCPOA potential agreement. But if that does not take place, I think probably Iran will continue advancing its military capabilities, ballistic missile capabilities, but also Iran will probably also work to strengthen and increase the range of its long-range ballistic missile program. And therefore, we could see Iran advancing the range to potentially 4 or 5, even up to 7,000 to 10,000 kilometers. That may probably still take some time, but Iran did launch the satellite Noor 400 kilometers or 450 kilometers into orbit. So Iran has a very sophisticated and advanced missile technology. that Iran is now going to advance further. Therefore, Iran is much stronger than a lot of Western journalists and analysts think, but also Iran's economy is much stronger. Iran has a very strong manufacturing and industrial base and very sophisticated research base within a range of manufacturing sectors. So Iran's economy is stronger, and therefore probably Iran does not need the JCPOA agreement as much as the US negotiation team and the Biden administration may think that Iran does. So these are some of the strategic situations, but also the strategic environment that we're now really looking at. And the context broader strategically is that the US is withdrawing from the Middle East, although the US maintain its central command base in Doha and Qatar. But really, the US is now withdrawing and has withdrawn from Afghanistan. The US is withdrawing from Iraq. Therefore, in the regional area around Iran, we are not any longer seeing US military presence as we did before. And that is also strengthening Iran's strategic position regionally. Well, thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to see you again. And please remember to subscribe to Asian Horizon. Thank you very much.